Come with me if you want a review. This is Movie Night. Hello and welcome to Movie Night, in-depth reviews in less than 5 minutes. I'm your host, Jonathan Paula. Tonight we'll take a long-awaited look at one of my top 10 favorite movies, as well as the other 4 movies in the Terminator franchise. So let's review this exciting pentology that revolutionized the genre, defied continuity, and never knew when to quit. We begin with the classic that started it all, simply titled The Terminator. This R-rated thrill that kicked off James Cameron's hugely successful career was released just before Halloween in 1984, eventually grossing $78 million at the box office. Produced on less than $7 million, this is a low-budget production with a high-concept plot. The 107-minute narrative follows an indestructible cyborg sent back in time from 2029 to assassinate a Los Angeles waitress, while a human resistance fighter is also sent back to protect her. Bodybuilder turned actor Arnold Schwarzenegger stars as the title character, a menacing machine who kills indiscriminately. Complete with ridiculous 80s hair, Linda Hamilton is featured opposite as the plucky and resilient hero, forced to run for her life with an unimaginable terror always a few steps behind. Michael Biehn is the gruff and resourceful protector, who doles out the majority of the picture's fascinating exposition, remarking on his robotic nemesis, "It can't be reasoned with, it doesn't feel pity or remorse or fear, and it absolutely will not stop, ever, until you are dead." Some other familiar faces show up as well. Bill Paxton even gets trashed in the first few minutes, but for the most part this is a contained story with few players, all of whom hit their respective marks with ease. Much has been said about Schwarzenegger's acting ability over the years, but his portrayal of the Terminator is his most famous role for a reason. He is both brilliant and terrifying here. A machine of few words, only 16 lines of dialogue in fact, he sternly declares, "I'll be back," mere moments before laying waste to an entire police station in a bloody murder spree.
Come with me if you want to live. Come on!
While I love gratuitous nudity that's actually integral to the plot, the unrelenting pace of this picture pauses only once, for a love scene that feels completely out of place. In his directorial debut, Cameron seamlessly mixes slow-motion tension with detailed close-ups, easy-to-follow wide shots, and occasionally he treats us to glimpses of a hellish post-apocalyptic future. Composer Brad Feidel's heavy and synthesized score is downright haunting, an ever-present sound that symbolizes the metallic man's non-existent heartbeat. I try to share a piece of interesting trivia in each of my reviews, and this little factoid may be my all-time favorite. As fantastic as Schwarzenegger is, O.J. Simpson was actually first considered for the role, and the producers feared, rather ironically, that he was too nice for the role and wouldn't be convincing as a killer. A necessity because of its small budget and cast, this movie goes for a slasher horror vibe rather than the sci-fi action approach its sequels took, but it absolutely succeeds. The few effects that are present, accomplished using model work, dangerous stunts, and even some stop motion, may not hold up that well, but they're good enough to advance the story. As believable as a movie involving a time-traveling killer cyborg can be, this is a limited but thrilling and rewatchable picture that sets up an even more entertaining sequel. The Terminator is a real classic with an unforgettable premise, and here's what you had to say about it in the YouTube comments. Paving the way for a lucrative and entertaining franchise, it was this humble slasher that started it all, and we both agreed, it's a great film. For tonight's poll question, how would you rank the Terminator series? Leave your list in the comments below. Next up, Terminator 2: Judgment Day. Director James Cameron returns for this ambitious follow-up that was released during the 4th of July weekend in 1991, where it eventually grossed $520 million worldwide. Thanks to its at-the-time unprecedented budget of $100 million, this picture is a bigger, more complicated, and more impressive effort than its predecessor in every way. In this 137-minute action sci-fi thriller, 2 separate deadly cyborgs are sent back in time, one to kill and the other to protect, a future resistance fighter when he's still a kid living in Los Angeles. Arnold Schwarzenegger returns as the intimidating title character, but this time he's helping our heroes rather than hunting them. Fortunately, he's also given way more to do, even if most of his dialogue is either technical exposition or cheesy one-liners. We rejoin Linda Hamilton 10 years later, who's become a tough and hardened pessimist after being locked away in a mental institution. Both individuals do an incredible job with this new dynamic, now fighting alongside each other as uneasy allies. Edward Furlong plays her young son, who despite being constantly whiny and annoying, manages to hold his own amid the bloody carnage.
Now! Put the gun down now! Get out of here!
Come on, guns, split! Come on!
Jesus, you were gonna kill that guy!
Of course, I'm a Terminator.
Listen to me very carefully, okay? You're not a Terminator anymore, all right? You got that? You just can't go around killing people.
Why?
What do you mean, why? 'Cause you can't.
Why?
Because you just can't, okay? Trust me on this.
Joe Morton does great work in a smaller but critical role as a computer scientist who is horrified to discover his technology effectively causes the apocalypse. Even Michael Biehn returns in a single-scene cameo, well, at least in the extended special edition. As the menacing villain, Robert Patrick portrays a liquid metal robot assassin known as T-1000, one of the best bad guys in movie history. His cold and unassuming delivery makes him even more chilling and terrifying than his counterpart in the first installment. Thinly disguised as a cop, his ability to morph into any shape and run super fast makes him an unstoppable antagonist. With this Capri Sun chameleon closing in, Schwarzenegger echoes a familiar line when he sternly advises a traumatized Hamilton, "Come with me if you want to live." The high-octane moments are flanked by a fascinating story that effortlessly advances from one scene to the next without any contrivances. Like when Furlong attempts to escape the relentless T-1000 by driving his dirt bike down the LA River in what is perhaps one of the greatest action sequences ever filmed. It's simple in its progression, with the nondescript location keeping things very easy to follow, but tense and exhilarating with its execution. Complete with crashes, impromptu convertible conversions, gunshots, and wickedly cool one-handed shotgun reloading, this centerpiece chase culminates with a breathtaking visual effects shot. Patrick emerging from a fireball in his liquid metal state before rematerializing into his office's appearance. Another fantastic sequence, loaded with impressive model work, highlights the horrifying results of a nuclear blast during one of Hamilton's nightmares. This groundbreaking work from ILM was not only revolutionary at the time, it scored Judgment Day one of its 4 Academy Awards, making this the only sequel in history to win an award when its predecessor wasn't even nominated. It also scored trophies for sound editing, and makeup. From the inventive liquid metal THX opening that begins the Blu-ray to background sparks during the smelting factory climax, this is a beautifully mixed feature that deserves to be appreciated on a surround sound system. Alongside this mix is Brad Feidel's fantastic score, mixing haunting themes with sharp, intense pulses. Framing the actors with cold hues and crisp lighting, Adam Greenberg's nominated cinematography work is excellent as well, with the lockdown anamorphic shots only moving when the action is motivated. One of Cameron's trademarks is the slow-motion build-up punctuated by a gunshot, and there's no better example of that technique than during the robot's first violent encounter, when Arnold marches down a shopping mall hallway, unloading shell after shell into his enemy. If memory serves, this is the first R-rated movie I ever watched, and the exciting thrill ride has been an all-time favorite of mine ever since. Speaking of rides, this movie also inspired the equally awesome T2 3D Battle Across Time attraction at Universal Studios, which contained a unique blend of live-action stunts and a short 3D film with the original cast. This picture's lasting legacy also led to an eventual 31-episode TV series, Terminator: The Sarah Connor Chronicles, which disregarded the subsequent films in favor of a direct continuation of this film's events. Judgment Day isn't just exciting and influential though, it also delivers some important themes regarding the value of human life and the uncertainty of our future, with the oft-repeated mantra, "There's no fate but what we make." Some minor mid-act pacing issues aside, this is a surprisingly believable, rewatchable, quotable, and influential picture from beginning to end. The crown jewel of James Cameron's extraordinarily successful career, Terminator 2: Judgment Day is a masterpiece of sci-fi and action, and one of my all-time favorite films. Here's what you had to say about it in the YouTube comments. In one of the most lopsided votes in the history of this program, your praise for T2 was overwhelming, with most mentioning the incredible visuals and action scenes. You scored this a 10 out of 10. One of the best sequels ever crafted, Judgment Day was well ahead of its time and is clearly an amazing film. Fast forwarding another decade, let's check out Terminator 3: Rise of the Machines. At a staggering budget north of $187 million, this Jonathan Mostow science fiction action film was the most expensive film ever greenlit when it was released in July of 2003. Fortunately for Warner Brothers, it made around $250 million in profit. The R-rated plot once again focuses on a cybernetic warrior from a post-apocalyptic future who is sent back in time to protect a disillusioned drifter and a veterinarian from a robotic assassin. After a 12-year hiatus between installments, Arnold Schwarzenegger returns as the title character in what would be his final role before assuming office as governor of California for the remainder of the decade. A bit older, he's still strong and amusing, dishing out quips and punches effortlessly. Nick Stahl and Claire Danes co-star as the weak humans that need protecting, and despite their best efforts, they're just not terribly likable. Trying to motivate Stahl before battle, Schwarzenegger advises, "Anger is more useful than despair." Although the picture gets points for including a fun cameo from the Dr. Silberman character, the decision to kill off Linda Hamilton's iconic role with a throwaway piece of exposition is just insulting. She was the real heart of this franchise, and if the script wasn't strong enough to convince her to sign on, then maybe that's a sign it needed a rewrite. Christina Loken has almost no dialogue as the new TX villain, a sexy anti-Terminator dominatrix-like femme fatale who could control electronics remotely and morph into any shape. She's the strongest and most versatile enemy our heroes have faced yet, but for some reason, perhaps her performance or the clunky writing, she just isn't particularly menacing or frightening. Although stabbing a guy from the backseat of a cop car and then proceeding to steer while he remains impaled was pretty damn cool.
Why are you here? Where are we going?
Keep moving. Get out of here. Now!
But far too much of Rise of the Machines plays out like an expensive cartoon, with gratuitous levels of destruction, including a ridiculous over-the-top car chase that sees a massive crane truck wiping out an office building, or a wall-destroying fistfight inside a bathroom. While there's some fun in this mindless action, the real draw of the 109-minute feature is the continued mythos of this fascinating sci-fi universe. Although some reworking of canon is required, showing the immediate events that caused Judgment Day itself is rather interesting. Rife with callbacks and one-liners, the movie's occasional use of humor works pretty well too, like an early clothing acquisition scene that parallels Part 2. Unlike the groundbreaking work of that film though, the visual effects here attempt to do too much. The work is competent enough, but it just isn't convincing to carry entire scenes. Like the aforementioned shot where Arnold dangles from a crane as it crashes through a building. It looks more like ragdoll physics from a video game. Brad Feidel's reused themes are incorporated decently well into Marco Beltrami's new score, which remains appropriate without ever being memorable. It's nowhere near the quality of the earlier pictures, but a really fantastic and well-written final scene saves this movie from being a complete cash grab. Terminator 3: Rise of the Machines is fast-paced fun that never truly disappoints. Here now are some of your reviews. It's hard to believe anything could live up to the bar set by Judgment Day, but that still doesn't excuse many of this film's flaws. You rated it a good. I'll be a touch more forgiving, if only because Schwarzenegger is so great, and give this a 7. Fourth in the series, my next review is for Terminator Salvation. Directed by MCG, which passes for a human name now apparently, this expensive $200 million dystopian action film was released in May of 2009, where it grossed $370 million. The 115-minute adventure follows a group of resistance fighters in the ruined post-Judgment Day future, who must work together to battle deadly machines. To its credit, this PG-13 rated movie took the sci-fi series to its next logical place, but by doing so, it removed all of the time travel intrigue and horror elements of its predecessors. And without Schwarzenegger's involvement, there's really no point at all. Sure, the futuristic battle scenes briefly shown during the earlier movies were awesome, but building an entire story around that concept is like having an ice cream sundae without the ice cream. You're just left eating a bowl of hot fudge, and no one wants that. The fresh cast is led by non-Americans Christian Bale and Sam Worthington, who attempt their best American accents throughout. The former plays Resistance leader John Connor, who constantly seems out of breath and angry for the entire picture, while the latter brings an interesting dynamic as a convicted killer coming to terms with a new identity. While Bale's interpretation of the character is a complete departure from what came before, the men give solid performances, especially in the few scenes they share together, even though they aren't given a great script to work with.
if you want to live.
Anton Yelchin is wonderful playing a younger version of Michael Biehn's character from Part 1, while Moon Bloodgood looks sexy and takes charge as a battle-hardened pilot. Sharing experience with a new ally, she remarks, "You can focus on what is lost, or you can fight for what is left." Rounding out the group is Bryce Dallas Howard, underutilized as Bale's wife, Common, rarely convincing as a dime a dozen soldier, Helena Bonham Carter breathes some life into a present-day prologue, and Linda Hamilton has a voice-only cameo in an uncredited role. Her involvement is minor, but with such a large disconnect to previous films, this small bit of continuity is key. Likewise, I appreciate Salvation's numerous setups and references, like an explanation for John Connor's scars, or where Kyle Reese learned to attach his shotgun to his wrist. But this attention to detail sometimes blatantly contradicts established canon, like one pivotal piece of exposition where a hard-nosed general played by Michael Ironside explains that Skynet, like all machines, has an off switch. Except Nick Stahl explicitly explained in Part 3 that there was no system core, it could not be shut down. The strengths and weaknesses of this planet-killing robot army seem to change whenever it's convenient to the plot. In a drastic tonal shift, this fourth installment is completely humorless, making the non-stop action feel less enjoyable than it could be. But when our heroes attempt to escape a giant 3-story tall robot harvester, the ensuing action is undeniably thrilling. Since this film doubles as a sort of prequel to previous events, we already know which characters will survive, robbing most of the movie of any real tension. Meanwhile, the entire experience is filmed with a very muted color palette. Everything is a boring shade of brown or gray. This visual decision was a terrible mistake that makes the whole movie look so bland and uninteresting. By comparison, here's what it might look like if it were properly saturated. Honestly, the most memorable part of the entire picture is a brief cameo by the original Terminator model, rendered with CGI to resemble Schwarzenegger's likeness. Were it not for its title, this would be an overlooked adventure people instantly forgot about, and certainly not worth seeing twice. Terminator Salvation delivers fleeting enjoyment that's disconnected from the franchise. Now let's check out some of your thoughts. Calling it a boring disappointment and the worst entry in the Terminator series, you rated Salvation a 4 out of 10. I'll be slightly more forgiving with a score of alright. Finally tonight, Terminator Genisys. Released nationwide on July 1, 2015, this fifth installment in the Terminator franchise is part sequel and part reboot. And much like 2009's Star Trek, X-Men Days of Future Past, or Mad Max Fury Road, neither of these antiquated terms accurately describe the type of movie this is, so I'm officially proposing that we now start calling them requels. They may start over with a soft in-universe reboot, but some existing lineage is usually retained. Anyway, Alan Taylor directs this sci-fi action requel, which is produced on a budget of $155 million, a sizable step down from the last two pictures. The unnecessarily complex film begins with the motivations and decisions that preceded James Cameron's 1984 original. A hardened resistance fighter in a post-apocalyptic future sends his trusted friend back in time to protect his mother when she was just a frightened waitress living in Los Angeles. When our hero arrives 45 years in the past, however, he discovers nothing is as expected. As if the Terminator franchise wasn't FUBAR before, Genisys throws caution to the wind by retconning the entire pentology. After all, the movie's promotional tagline does proclaim, "Reset the future." This is the movie's first and biggest mistake. Rearranging the events of the existing saga is blasphemous enough, but when all of these alterations occur off-screen and are only explained via wordy exposition, it may allow for some more creative freedom, but it alienates fans of the series and undercuts the importance of all previous entries. In fact, familiarity with this franchise actually hurts the picture's screenplay, as you're constantly expecting things that no longer exist. Going into this PG-13 rated production with fresh eyes, however, might result in a more coherent experience. Indeed, the lumbering 126-minute feature completely bastardizes the existing canon, ignoring parts 3 and 4 entirely. I will say, however, that a 15-minute prologue leading up to the events of the original film is really interesting. For the first time, we get to see the time machine itself. Really though, all of this time travel mumbo-jumbo is just a thinly veiled attempt to explain away Arnold Schwarzenegger's 67-year-old appearance, returning to the franchise as the titular cybernetic protector after another 12-year hiatus.
Hey, I think this guy's a couple cans short of a six-pack.
Your clothes. Give them to me. Now.
You won't be needing any clothes. I've been waiting for you.
The in-universe explanation for his appearance works though. He may have a metal endoskeleton, but his living tissue still ages on the outside. This brilliant idea reportedly courtesy Jim Cameron himself, who otherwise had no involvement with the production. Remarking on his appearance and age, Arnie quips to a doubtful ally, "I'm old, not obsolete." Schwarzenegger really is the saving grace here. Even after serving 8 years in office, this guy still has it. His physique is strong, his tongue-in-cheek delivery is as good as ever, and seeing him in a more parental capacity was an interesting twist. Every other major character is recast though. In fact, Jason Clarke is now the 8th actor to portray the sentimental freedom fighter John Connor. Jai Courtney leads the group as his second-in-command, caught up in the temporal mayhem, and Emilia Clarke is the headstrong vixen hell-bent on destroying the machines before they wipe out mankind. J.K. Simmons is great in a small supporting role, but his underdeveloped character isn't integral to the plot. Although Lee Byung-hun portrays the classic liquid metal villain T-1000, it's a familiar face that gets repurposed into the primary bad guy role. And thanks to Paramount's obnoxious marketing that was rife with spoilers, you likely already know who this is. Suffice it to say, it's the film's second worst decision, a character change that makes little sense with poorly explained powers. They possess the ability to morph and rebuild on command, and their only weakness is magnets or something? When this character attempts to escape the pull of a CAT scan machine though, the ensuing visual, which sees their body scattering into layers across the air, is extremely cool. Later, the poor Golden Gate Bridge is once again destroyed in a blockbuster action sequence, as a pivotal chase culminates on the iconic roadway. When our heroes attempt to prevent the robot apocalypse from some stupid software launch, a visible countdown timer is frequently shown on screen to help increase the tension. It's an overwrought but useful mechanism for storytelling, especially in this genre, but when the clock randomly jumps forward in time whenever it wants to, the usefulness of the trope is completely ruined. Technically speaking, the movie works, and it looks good. Moments from T1 are recreated rather faithfully, the music from Lauren Balfe fits okay, and the visual effects are inventive and impressive. But the Hollywood execubots who greenlit this picture seem to have misunderstood the series' mantra, "No fate but what we make," as an invitation for an unneeded follow-up, instead of leaving well enough alone. Ostensibly built as the first installment in yet another new trilogy, this movie is enjoyable enough on its own, but as part of a larger franchise, it falls short. Terminator Genisys may be a clusterfuck of continuity, but Arnold makes it worthwhile. I thought it was just slightly better than Part 4, and a good movie. Before we go, let's take a look at your tweet critiques. If you see a new movie in theaters, tweet your review with the JPMN hashtag. On next week's season finale, I'll once again be torturing myself by reviewing 5 of the worst movies of all time: The Conqueror, Exorcist II: The Heretic, Howard the Duck, Theodore Rex, and Saving Christmas. If you feel like suffering along with me this week, you have until next Friday to watch and review these films. If you'd like to see more of this show, please click the links for the related reviews on the right, or subscribe. Once again, my name is Jonathan Paula. Thank you for watching and listening. And until next time, hasta la vista, baby.